if you find that purpose in life, you have that passion in your heart, and you will work hard to achieve that. People will remember things you gave much more than the things someone else did. One of the things you can do is to actually have a plan on how to get a mentor.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Inspirational Indians, which is a Sarga Samvad dialogue series brought to you by the Agastya Foundation. My name is Adhirath Sethi, and today I have the privilege of interviewing someone that I think is truly inspirational. He is a wearer of many caps, you might say. He is someone that I think will offer some really engaging insights to all our listeners, many of whom are quite young. And I really look forward to what he has to say. Mr. M.R. Rangaswami. M.R., welcome. It's great to have you here.
Great to be here.
So M.R., if I had to summarize your many, many contributions, I'm going to take that challenge and just try and encapsulate it very quickly, even though it is quite a lot. You started your own company, Sand Hill Group, in Silicon Valley back in 1997. You were an angel investor, I think even before that term had caught on and has the sort of aura that it has today. 10 years later, you founded the Corporate Eco Forum, which is an organization that promotes sustainable business innovation and best practices. So you were hitting the green revolution again, way before anyone else realized how important it was. A few years later, you founded Indiaspora, which is an organization that looks to increase the impact and the presence of the Indian American community in the US. Apart from this, you also sit on the boards of the Kailash Satyarthi Children's Foundation, which deals with child labor, the Nudge Foundation, which deals with poverty, and the Wish Foundation, which deals with healthcare. So there's again a huge, broad gamut of involvements there in the philanthropic and the charity space. You've been described as an investor, an entrepreneur, a software guru, a green energy pioneer, and a philanthropist. And if all this isn't already crazy enough, you managed to do this despite retiring at the age of 41. So I assume any young listeners out there, whether or not they were hooked by your numerous achievements, they'll certainly be intrigued by this last snippet of information. So I really look forward to picking your brain on this, and I hope I haven't missed anything out.
So one of the things that I want to mention right up front is don't believe anything you hear about me. I think my journey was an accidental one. That's the way I like to describe it. When I was in India, I studied to be an accountant. I didn't like accounting. Then I thought I'd try a stint at law. I didn't like that either. And then I came to the US to do an MBA, and I really didn't seem to like that much either. And so as a result of all this stuff, I ended up just getting a job in a manufacturing company. And so don't ask me how I went from accounting to law to manufacturing, but that's what happened. But then I had a big break in my life where when I was in my manufacturing job, there was a consultant who told me that I should be going to Silicon Valley. I have no idea why he mentioned that to me, but I became intrigued. And for all of you young people there, I was living in a city called Houston, Texas, and Silicon Valley is about 1,500 miles away. And this was in 1982. And keep in mind, in 1982, there was no cell phones. No internet, no LinkedIn, no Snapchat, no Facebook. None of these things existed. So you have to kind of make this journey. It's almost a journey like you might have read a children's book called Around the World in 80 Days or 5 Weeks in a Balloon. It was one of those kind of things where I had to go from point A to point B without knowing what Silicon Valley was. And that was my daring adventure to kind of pick up and move to Silicon Valley without even having a job. And luckily, there was a company there who somehow thought I was good enough and hired me. And that was my entry into Silicon Valley 40 years ago. And since then, I've been very lucky and fortunate to have seen what has happened in Silicon Valley, right from Steve Jobs developing his computer, the original Lisa, to all the new products that have come out of Silicon Valley, including all the phones from Apple and all these things. So I've had kind of a front row seat into all the exciting things that have happened in technology over 40 years. And that is my journey in a nutshell. It's been quick, but it's been accidental. But, it's better to be lucky than anything else. And so I've tried to convert my luck into saying I wanted to do things more than a job. And that's when I left corporate life. And like you said, in 1996, and formed my first company in 1997. And that was with a view to being an angel investor. So an angel investor is someone who looks for opportunities or little companies, and you end up investing your own money into those companies. So it's a very high risk proposition where you end up investing, meeting young companies. So I would meet lots of young people who just got out of college, who would start a company, and I would end up helping, not just investing and putting my money, but also mentoring them, advising them, and giving them the knowledge on how to run a successful company. So that's my way I started of giving back. And that's what I've done ever since I set out to retire at age 40. I never really retired. And also, by the way, I failed at that goal. I was only able to retire at age 41. So I missed it by a year, but then really it's not retiring. I've been busier than ever than I've been when I had a real job.
So yeah, that is a fascinating journey, Amar. And as you've described, it hasn't quite been a straight line. And I think most successful people do have that experience. But if you were to look at the key inflection points, as it were, in your path, what would be those 3 or 4, or 5 moments that you said, okay, this is where the course was truly, moved towards where I am today?
I want to talk to you now about taking risk. And you are all young people who are going to be listening to this, and you have to learn about risk. And let me tell you this. So your generation is going to live for 100 years. My generation, when we started as kids, was only going to live for 60 or 70 years. So there was a sense of urgency in our generation to get everything done quickly. Finish your school. And if the age is 18 when you finish school, try to finish it by 16. There was almost a sense of urgency to get everything done quickly. And then you get your degree very quickly. Then you get married immediately. Then you have kids right away. And then you work, and you retire at age 60. That was kind of the model that we were growing up with. So that sense of urgency, for me personally, I didn't have a child's life as much as I would like all of you to have. What do I mean by that? For some reason, in changing schools and such, I skipped one class. Okay. So I ended up at age 6, 7, or 8, being the youngest kid in my class, always 1 year ahead of everybody else in that class. And it seemed nice at that time, and everybody said, you're the youngest one. But the problem is, I wish my parents had kept me back in my own age group so that I could enjoy 1 more year as a child. Just think of how precious that would be, to be a child, to play, to do things, not to worry about life. And so I missed that. So every step of the way, I had that sense of urgency. So I finished my schooling at age 15 instead of being age 16 or 17, and then I ended up studying, ended up getting a job, all very quickly. So my advice to you is to take risk. You are all going to live till age 100. You have 25 more years to live than we thought we would live when we were young. So what does this mean? It's okay to be the oldest kid in class. Don't feel bad that if you're the oldest one. So please be sure that you enjoy life as a kid. right? That's step one. The second step is maybe between school and college, you can actually go do something in life that you've always wanted to do. So I'm telling you things that maybe your parents may not agree with you on, but maybe you can take a year and work at a nonprofit. Maybe you take a year and get a regular job. Maybe you do something that you really feel excited about. And then maybe you go to college. And then when you finish college, maybe you take another year off. This may seem radical, and your parents may or may not agree with what I'm telling you, but it will work out okay in the end. So point number three, what you can do is, even when you graduate, instead of graduating at 22 or 23, you might graduate at age 25. You can still have 75 years of life to live. So just think of that. I think you can take more time and be more deliberate in everything you do in life. And you don't have to have that sense of urgency to kind of do everything in a fast-paced way. So that's the kind of risk I'm asking you to take, is take time, enjoy life as a young person, grow into life, and you'll still be okay, because you'll have a long life left to work and to enjoy all the other things that come with life, like your family, friends, children, and so forth. And you'll still have a very meaningful life as you move along. And that's what I mean by taking risk. The other thing that I found as a young person was, my parents always, like all other parents, wanted you to be an engineer or a doctor. And I guess I broke every rule in life. I was, like I said, an accountant, a want-to-be lawyer, and an MBA student, and never ended up being what I think my parents had in life for me. But, so be it. So follow your passion would be the other risk I ask you to take. Just follow whatever you want to do, and you'll be good at it. And I think you'll succeed. And you can always fall back on something your parents have told you.
Again, we've discussed that, it's important to take risks. And yet there are a lot of people that probably are terrified of risk. And we often wonder, is this a skill that can be acquired, or is it something that you're either born with or you don't have? Because there are many times people take risks and they don't realize they're actually taking risks, because, it's something that they're doing automatically. And when they look at an actual, defined risk, they sort of back away and say, that's too much for me. So is this something someone can learn as a skill?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously, I have always been a risk taker. So it's hard for me to pass judgment on people who don't take risk. Having moved to the United States with $8 of foreign exchange in my pocket, that's taking risk, right? You come here and then you got to find your way. But there are two types of risks. There is calculated risk and there's speculative risk, right? So on the calculated risk side, I think a lot of people can learn that skill, which is to say, here's the probability I'll succeed, or here's the probability I'll fail. I try one of those and then learn from it, and I can take risk. So it can be learned. But there's certain types of risks where it's totally based on intuition or gut. And that is something I think that happens with only people who have that kind of profile, where you have to say, okay, I'm going to do it because I have a gut feel, and you might fail totally. So I think the calculated risk can be learned, but at some point in life, you also have to take the speculative risk, or risk where you don't know all the factors and you have to make a judgment call. And that's up to each individual's personality. But, the good thing about kids at Agastya and stuff is doing experiments and doing those kinds of things you're taking risk. You're trying to enter a competition, you're trying to build a model. There's so much risk involved in those activities. But, so I hopefully your education builds that risk-taking capability in you as well.
Emma, when I listen to you and, the different things that you've done, I'm kind of reminded of maybe subconsciously, or maybe, because you planned it, I'm not sure. Stephen Levitt, for example, has this thing about failing fast. He said, fail quickly so that you can jump to the next thing. You can decide what it is that you don't want to do, because that's how you eventually build up. And it seems that you did do that, in terms of you quickly decided, okay, this isn't for me, what's next? How do you decide, when it's, because a lot of people have that problem. They don't know, or they try and plow through, or they try and say, look, I'm not being persevering enough. Whereas it takes a certain, I suppose, inner strength or, self-knowledge to say that, no, this is not for me, and, what's next? So what do you say to kids who, perhaps, are in that zone and you want them to fail fast and move to the next thing?
I think this is a good question that you bring up. And I can relate this to my own life. I I used to do what was called startups in the US. When you join a startup company and everything looks good, but in a year or 2 years, it fails. The startup fails. And so the first company I went into was a startup. And in 3 years, it grew every year. And so I was very excited. Year 3, it went bankrupt. It went broke, right? And so that happened to me a couple of times. So one of the things is to fail fast is on one side, but on the other side, if you have passion to be in a startup, you may have to try it 2 or 3 times before you become successful. So they both go kind of hand in hand in a weird way, right? You want to fail quickly, but on the other hand, if you have passion to do startups, you may end up doing 2 or 3 startups before you actually succeed.
And the other thing you were speaking, which is quite true, that most Indian parents would not perhaps share your vision of your recipe for what a child should be doing. And I think it leads into the Indian culture even today. I mean, to a lesser extent, I suppose. There was a while back when Indians were seen primarily as middle management, great middle management material. And over time, that perception changed to, they'd be great CFOs. And over time, that changed to, no, an Indian would be a great number 2. And now if we look at the world stage, as it were, some of the largest companies, Indians are basically the CEOs. You've got, Google, you've got Microsoft, and it's to an almost, embarrassing degree how many Indians are actually rising to the CEO spot. But at the same time, there's a difference between, say, a CEO and a founder, something that you're more familiar with through startups. And what does it take? Is risk-taking innate, or is it something that we learn? But what would it take for an Indian to be, for example, the next Elon Musk? Because that's a different mindset and a different risk-taking appetite compared to, say, what someone would work up an organization and become, the head of that organization would take.
Yeah, I think it's two different mindsets. I think if you want to be a CEO of a company, there are many CEOs now. There are about 50 CEOs of Indian origin in the top 500 companies in the world. So it's a very big, almost like 10% of these CEOs are Indian, right? That requires a different mindset. And that mindset is based also on Indian values, to be patient, to have empathy, to help others. All that comes into being. You become a professional manager in a company and you grow up in the organization. And that's how people like Satya Nadella at Microsoft or Sundar Pichai grew up. He is growing up in the organization and becoming a CEO. They were never entrepreneurs. They didn't take risk like Elon Musk would have taken, where Elon Musk was an entrepreneur who said, I can make an electric car. And he took a lot of risk. Early days, Tesla wasn't working well, but then eventually it all worked out and he is the biggest manufacturer of electric vehicles. So that would be the other side, which is you start as an entrepreneur, you end up taking a lot of risk. And if you're successful, you go one way. Now, on the other path, there were many other people who started making electric cars who failed. And we never hear about them, right? You only hear about the successful people. So always keep in mind when you fail, nobody hears about the failures. So when you look around, you only hear about the people who succeeded. So always keep that in mind. You're not the only one who failed. The millions of people who have failed in whatever they started doing, it's only the ones who succeeded who get spoken about for the most part. So don't despair because you failed. You don't read hundreds of stories about all the people who didn't climb Mount Everest You only hear about the people who did climb Mount Everest, right? I think you probably know there are tens of thousands of people who failed climbing Mount Everest.
Yeah.
In fact, I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro a few years ago, and I thought everybody did Mount Kilimanjaro, right? There are 50,000 people who climb or try to climb Kilimanjaro every year. And guess what? Over 1/3 of them don't make it to the top, okay? But nobody talks about those people. You only say, hey, MR went to the top, so it must be easy, right? But if you fail, you kind of go, oh, how come I didn't do it? How come this old guy did it? And I'm young and I didn't do it? But there are many, many young people who never made it to the top. So just keep that in mind as you're taking risk.
On the topic of success, one of the things that, research has shown is that in the US, they did a study and they found that most successful people very early on had a vision. They may not have known exactly how they were going to get there, but they had an idea, a sort of a flag that they had sort of put for the endpoint for where they wanted to reach. Is it something that you had, even though your journey was, it wasn't a straight line, but was there a vision very early on for, yes, this is the kind of success that I want?
I think there are a few people I've met in life who have said, I'm going to study this. I'm going to get married at this age. I'm going to become an engineer of this kind, work in this kind of company. Very, very few people. Most people in the US who have gone to college, almost, I think, 7 out of 10 don't finish the degree they started. They end up doing some other major or some other degree, right? So even your career can take a path like that, where you aspire to be something, but you kind of go in a zigzag path. So just because you turned left doesn't mean you can't correct yourself and go the right way, So I think be aware of these kind of things, because when you're in the journey, it looks like you're losing. It looks like you're not being successful. But if you step back and you chart your journey, you may find that you're actually doing okay. So one of the things I ask you to do as young people is maybe once a year or something, step back and see where you're going and how you're doing and stuff, as opposed to just checking the moment you're in and thinking you're successful or not.
One of the things that you often speak about is, people should have, on the same topic of this, at a young age, have a mentor or a role model. I think you've spoken very passionately about it in some of your talks. As when you're born in privilege, or, as people who've, in my case, of course, I've been lucky enough that I have had quite a few role models, people to look up to just go to for advice. A lot of the kids that Agastya meets, unfortunately, don't have that. They don't have a positive male role model in their lives, a parent or a relative or an uncle, or even a friend's father. They don't have access to someone that can guide them and say that, look, this is how you can chart your path, or give them advice when things go wrong. What kind of advice would you give to those kids? How do they actually get a mentorship or a role model without actually having access to someone that easily?
When I grew up, I didn't even know I needed a role model or a mentor. So I never had one till I was actually in a job, and I accidentally got a mentor who took a liking to me and started advising me and helping me around. And that's when I understood how much benefit this person can bring to you, right? And so as a person who's not in privilege, it's going to be very, very hard to even be able to understand you need one. And if you need one, how do you go get one? I think one of the things you can do is to actually have a plan on how to get a mentor. So I think you start even by researching on the internet or talking to people to see how you identify a mentor. And then you follow the rules of maybe trying to get to some of these mentors. Sometimes it can be a relative, sometimes it can be a teacher, sometimes it can be someone you meet at school or some other place. So I think some of it you have to plan and ask them to be your mentor, and sometimes it's by accident, right? But the key thing is to have a plan. And you need to write down what you look for in a mentor. This person has to be able to give you candid advice, tell you what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. Also has to be helpful to you, but not be one of your parents because they have a very different agenda. So maybe a teacher can be a mentor, maybe someone you meet, a relative of yours who's not directly, your parents can be a mentor. So I think the main thing is to start planning as to why you need a mentor, then going about trying to find right candidates for being that. And then when you identify a mentor, to be very prepared that when you meet this person, you tell them who you are, what you want, and to be able to listen to them and to come back to them and show them you've taken action. So it's not a one-way street. You have to give your commitment that you are listening to them and resolving the issues that they told you to get fixed. So I think it's an iterative process. There are some good articles online that talk about how to get a mentor, how to be prepared for a meeting with a mentor, how to do follow-ups. So there's a lot of knowledge on the internet now on this. But the first thing is to understand you do need one. I think every child needs to have a mentor to succeed. Your chances of being successful at least go up 100% if you have a mentor.
Okay. And the other thing on, we touched upon vision and you said that, but did you have a personal vision? I mean, you say you arrived in the US with $8, but there must have been something, that you had decided, okay, this is where I want to end up, at least, if not in a structured kind of, this is what I want to be doing kind of way, but at least in terms of who you wanted to be and the kind of person you wanted to grow into.
Yeah, in my case, I think, I still hadn't found myself as to exactly where I wanted to live, what I wanted to do. And I have to admit it, even now, I don't know where I want to live and what I want to do. So I'm still finding myself. And maybe for some of us, we spend our entire lives trying to find out who we are and where we want to go in life, So it's each person to their own.
I think a lot of people might even resonate with that. I think it's a common feeling that I don't know when it, but you must have an idea for, okay, I'm at point A. If I want to go to point B, C, or D, what is the call that I take, in terms of which step I take forward? So what would be your criteria, as it were, when you say, okay, this is the direction I'm going to move forward in?
I think one thing I would give as advice is for young people, when you are charting your course or taking risk or whatever, you need to have a plan, which you can measure, right? So if you say you're going to get this kind of job and you're going to try it for 2 years, you've got to have metrics on the way that says, you are making it or not making it. You have to change course. So you have to guide yourself during that time frame, right? So it's not basically saying I'm going to do X, and then 4 years later you go, I don't know why I did it. Now I failed. You need to measure yourself. And that's why mentors become important as well, because you'll be able to go and report to them as to what you're doing and be able to get advice along the way and stuff. So whatever you do in your journey, please measure yourself frequently, maybe once every 3 months or 6 months. Do a gut check to see if indeed that is the right path for you.
You've had some extensive experience with philanthropic ventures. You've been part of a lot of organizations, including, I suppose, helping Agastya now as you are. So what is your take on philanthropy? And if you can give us some key anecdotes, we'd love to hear that.
Yeah. So let me start with this profound statement one of my billionaire friends made. This guy's billionaire with a B, one of the richest Americans. And in private, he told me, he said, MR, the biggest thing I failed at, he said was, and he signed the giving pledge to give away all his money. He said the biggest regret he has in life is he didn't start early enough. Just think of that. Here's a man who's been so successful in life. His biggest regret is not having started to give back early enough in life. So I would contend to you that even a 6-year-old can give something as a philanthropist. You can start as young as you can to be someone who's a giver. And one thing, I've set a goal for myself, and I hope I will accomplish this before my lifetime, is to be known as a giver and not as a taker. And everybody should go through that assessment. It may be early in life, you are taking. You're taking from your parents. You're taking from your teachers. You're taking from other people in life. But hopefully at some point that turns to where you're giving, right? And you got to think through that. You got to be aware of that point all the way in your life, right? So that you move from a net taker of things to a net giver of things. And that's something most people don't do in their lives. And that's what my billionaire friend was alluding to, is he never stopped to say, when have I become a giver or a taker? I guess most of us, when you're taking, you just get used to it, right? Just think of it. Your mother feeds you every day, you get used to it. But you never think, one day should I make a meal for my mother, right? You never think that. It's just human nature, right? But if you're constantly thinking, are you a giver or a taker, maybe you will come to that realization sooner than most people, right? So that is the biggest thing. And I didn't know myself till I came to, like I said, age 41, that I needed to give. And the way it started was I was starting a new venture, a conference business. And when I started it and I invited people, nobody ever wanted to come to that conference. And so that made me think of the business model of my conference. And that's when I decided, what if I make this conference one where all the profits would go to nonprofits, right? And so that's when I started thinking about giving versus taking, because my whole life was, I made a salary, I got a bonus, I got stock options, I was getting everything, right? And so when I started this conference, my immediate way of thinking about it is, I got to make money. But then I started thinking, what if I didn't make money, And that was my turning point for me to say, okay, now I'm a giver. And that happened to me much later in life. But that's why I'm telling people now, think of that early on in life, right? You kind of maybe even have a diary that says, take, 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 take. And then you have a list that says give, give. Initially, you'll find it's all take, and there's nothing on this side that says give, right? Simple thing like that. You keep a diary and you just do that. I think it'll set in your mind that what am I giving as opposed to taking? That happened to me only at age 41. So my regret is, why didn't I think of that earlier, right? And so that would be my advice to young people, is keep this liability of giving and taking, and it'll come to you sooner than later that maybe you need to cook for your mother. Maybe you need to wash clothes one day. Maybe you need to iron clothes one day for your father. Whatever it is, right? Then you'll kind of put something in the give column of your balance sheet, right? So that would be my advice that I would give to young people who are watching the show, is to have more points on the give side than on the taking side. And it's not about money. It's not just about money. It's about deeds. It's about action. It's not quantifiable. It's not like I got $10 or 10 rupees and I'm giving 12 rupees back.
I think it's something you can develop as a mindset at a very early age. And I think probably John D. Rockefeller, I think, had this thing from an early age. I think he was just told 10%. Whatever you make, 10% has to go to charity. And he kind of kept that percentage fairly constant throughout his life. So even when he became extremely wealthy, he was still giving 10%, but it never seemed like he was extending himself, because this had been something he was instilled with at a very young age. So I think it feeds into what you're saying. And the other thing Absolutely. I worry about, Amar, is in this age of social media, of course, we say give and take, but there's a lot out there that kind of tells you that, oh, so and so is doing this, and so is doing that. And I think we sort of get wrapped up in this thing of, I don't have enough, because I see people around me and I'm constantly seeing pictures on Instagram of, the expensive things other people have. And I don't know, I wonder if it's feeding back into people's mindset of being more into, as you're saying, to take than into give, because they always feel, or it kind of makes you feel that you don't have enough, which may not be the case. So I think, how would you, what advice would you give, to kids who are constantly getting influenced, and as a result, it probably dents their philanthropic drive, I think.
Yeah, unfortunately, social media has really brought on FOMO, right? Fear of missing out, looking at your friends doing things that you cannot do. It's really caused so much angst with children, and so much envy and jealousy and frustration coming out, seeing one of your friends post on social media doing something expensive, something luxurious that you couldn't do, So I think the way to think of this is you don't, when you're dead and gone, you don't take anything with you. I mean, I think that we all have to think through that and say, okay, maybe you enjoyed that momentary pleasure of buying a shirt or going to a cricket match or someone else. All that stuff is nice, but it's transitory. It's there for a moment. It's not permanent. But I think people will remember the things you gave much more than the things someone else did that didn't include you, right? And so think of it that way. Think of how people will remember you versus remembering this person. Write down what you want to be known as by people who say, MR is gone, or, Adhirath is gone from this life. What are they going to talk about you? They're not going to talk about you having that expensive car. Or if they do talk about you having the expensive car, they'll say, he had such a great car, but he didn't take it with him, right? Or are they going to say, oh, Adhirath was a very generous person. He helped me in life. I think more people will talk about what you gave than what you took. So think about it that way when things happen on social media.
Great. One of the things is you seem to speak about questioning. A lot of your life, you seem to have, asked the right questions and use that to sort of guide yourself along the path that you've taken. In India, unfortunately, one of the reasons Agastya was, in fact, conceptualized was to create a generation of kids that question. This thing that we say is yes to why, versus, sitting in a classroom and nodding your head and saying yes to everything. But instead asking why. When a teacher tells you the earth revolves around the sun, ask why. Let him give you some proof. And how do we, build that, that culture, or this thing? Many of us are sold on answers. We're not sold on questions. How do we build a culture? Or how would you tell kids? What advice would you give them to say, okay, this is how you can go about being of a questioning nature rather than someone that just nods and takes the answer they're given?
I would say, I think the question you're asking here is, what is the purpose? I think that's one of the things that I missed out earlier that I want to bring up is always you need to try to figure out what is your purpose in life. And that's the why you asked. It's like not what you're doing, but why are you doing it, right? What that goes back to is purpose. And that will be the passion that you have in your heart. Right? Because if you find that purpose in life, you have that passion in your heart, and you will work hard to achieve that. And so I think if you ask me, is my purpose to make $1 million a year? That really won't drive me from my heart. Whereas if you said, I'm going to employ 100 people in my company, that's purpose. I'm giving jobs to people. I'm employing people, giving them livelihoods. In turn, they are taking care of their families. That would give me purpose.
Yeah.
So your goals and the why needs to be purpose driven. And I think that's what you led to is how do you get that purpose aligned with what's resonating in your heart. And if once you do that, you'll be successful. But again, it's easier said than done. It may take multiple attempts at doing it, but hopefully in your lifetime, all of you find that purpose aligned with what drives you from your heart.
And before we again jump in, Emma, I know you've been involved now with Agastya for a while, and I think you've made the trip down to the campus as well, if I'm not mistaken. And what advice, or how do you see Agastya as an institution, and as someone that has built his own institutions? What advice do you have for the foundation in terms of where we are and how we should sort of project and look to move forward?
Yeah. I have to say this, Agastya is one of the most amazing nonprofits I've been involved with because of two things. One, you bring the real potential of a child out of them, and these are not the fortunate kids who live in cities and have a great life. These are small town kids, village kids, where you expose them to such amazing things. You bring out their curiosity, bring out their passion, bring out their desires and purpose, like I said, what they want to accomplish, what they want to try out. And I've never seen that at so many organizations I've visited and have spent time with. And so I think as that spirit is what I think I was enamored with when I visited Kupam, and I've seen your schools and stuff like that. That's what really drove me to be such a supporter of Agastya. And the fact that it also resonates with me in terms of risk, because when you're told to solve a problem, a science problem of any kind, till it's solved, you're taking so much risk that it could fail, that you wouldn't accomplish the results. And I love that part of incorporating that risk element and the curiosity element combined with the risk element. Because not every kid that does one of your experiments or tries their hand at going into a science competition is going to win, or their prototype is not going to work properly, or all these things are going to happen. But the fact that you're allowing them to take that risk, allowing them to fail, and then they learn from it and succeed in the future. So that I love that spirit of Agastya.
So great. We can move, I think, to segment 4. So I've got about 6 questions here that I'm just going to throw at you, and let's see what comes back. So let's go. Question number 1. One thing you wish someone had told you when you were 15 years old?
I wish someone had told me that computers were going to take over the world. I had no idea.
Okay, I think a lot of us would resonate with that. Question 2 is one person from history you would love to spend the day with?
There would be only one person, and that would be Mahatma Gandhi. I wish I had a little bit of time with him. I wish I had spent even 10 minutes with him.
Question 3, your biggest regret or failure and how it shaped you?
I would say in my case, the startups that I did 2 different startups, and each one failed. And when I was with those companies initially, I thought they would both be the biggest successes in life.
One book you would take to outer space, not a survival book, obviously, but just a book that you love.
Again, that would be the autobiography of Mahatma Gandhi, because I read that from cover to cover. And what I liked about that book was he talked about how he had failed and how imperfect he was as a person, because most autobiographies talk about how great people were. I think in his case, he was so vulnerable. I loved it.
An idea that you wish you had first? I know the computers thing was one, it must be there on your list, but other than that?
Yeah, I would say I was working, helping a company on the board of a company that could have been the next Twitter. And I regret that because they had similar technology, but they let people type in as much as they wanted. And so people would type in essays instead of limiting it to 148 characters. That I regret.
Wow, that is interesting. It's true though, you're right. I think giving people too many words was the problem there. The biggest problem that needs solving right now, and I'm going to add a caveat, which people seem to be ignoring.
For young people like you today, there's only one big problem to solve, and that is climate change. Because if you don't solve climate change, none of us will be around in the future.
Yes, well, I cannot disagree with that, MR. Absolutely. I think it's a huge issue that people need to give all their attention to. I think that's it, really. I think that concludes most of what I wanted to ask you. Is there anything you'd like to add? Any advice you'd like to give the kids in general before we sign off?
I'd say, as I told you earlier, may you live 100 years.
Thank you, Amar. It was wonderful interacting with you, and I'm going to have a whale of a time watching this again and probably reabsorbing the things that you have said and shared. And I have no doubt that the children who watch this, and in fact, the friends of Agastya in general who go through this video, will come away with some real knowledge and takeaways from this. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.